Hi, and welcome to a JDMIS webinar on the art of creating jewelry. My name is Alex, and I'm one of the directors at the Jewelry Design and Management International School. And today, we're going to be sharing with you more about the different specializations that exist in the jewelry industry for jewelry designing and manufacturing. But before that, we're also going to know a little bit more about the jewelry industry in general. You're here because you have an interest in jewelry. And I wanted to share with you what drew me to the jewelry industry because I've seen the same sorts of things happen with many of our successful students and graduates finding satisfaction in this creative industry. I was originally in the IT industry doing IT management and marketing management related to IT. And I came to jewelry because I was very interested in the fact that it was both creative and happy. It wasn't a very stressful industry. It was an industry where we had lots of opportunities to work with customers and help them enjoy what it was that we were doing. But most importantly, it was because it was a growth industry. So let me tell you a little bit more about those. Firstly, jewelry is a creative industry. You're effectively helping people express their personal style. You're working with customers to design unique and memorable jewelry pieces, but more importantly, you're creating heirlooms, things that have value and that your customers will enjoy again and again. They're not temporary or transient things. Jewelry is also a happy industry. It celebrates significant occasions, and that lets you connect with customers in ways that absolutely no other product can. Things like making birthday gifts and anniversary gifts, working with customers to make unique engagement rings or wedding bands, basically making things that they're going to have imbued with significance for the rest of their lives, gives us as designers and as people working in the jewelry industry a lot of satisfaction. But more importantly, we really need to think about, is it a good business to be in? And jewelry certainly is. In fact, most people don't know, but jewelry is by far the most significant contributor to global sales of any personal accessory. Its relevance for everyday use, but it's also its significant cultural importance present jewelry with a unique selling proposition that allows us to target customers across the world in different age groups, in different price brackets, and basically allows us to have every person be our potential customer. And why? Well, it's because jewelry is part fashion, embodying the trends and the aesthetics that designers need to come up with investment, incorporating the high intrinsic value of the gemstones and the precious metals that customers really see as a long-term investment. So that really gives us exciting opportunities and makes this industry a very unique one to look at. Now that you know a little bit more about the jewelry industry, I'd like to introduce you to Tanja Sadow. Tanja is the founder of JDMIS, and she is going to be running this webinar. Tanja, welcome.
Hello to all jewelry enthusiasts. I'm very excited to be here to share with you some of the knowledge we have on the art of jewelry making. Jewelry, of course, goes back many, many years. It goes back to about 82,000 BCE, which was when the first shell was picked up, known as an objet trouvé, and it was worn. We don't even really know the reason why or how it started because we have no written word. Writing wasn't existing then. But it certainly is something that is much older than so many of the other industries that we have today. Much older than medicine, older than dentistry, lawyers, all of those things. So we're going to talk about the traditional older techniques, and we're also going to cover some of the new modern technologies as well. So hope it'll be very interesting for you. So let's take a look at how jewelry is designed and made. We are going to go through a little bit about jewelry design and the new technologies, which are called the CAD and the CAM. And we'll give you some demonstrations as well so that you can really understand it better. We'll talk about the traditional jewelry making versus the mass production process. And of course, hand fabrication. And not only that, but we've got the new technologies that were invented in the 80s, which are very exciting. So let's start with jewelry design. So when it comes to jewelry design, we have to keep three very important things in mind. First and foremost, anything that is designed as a piece of jewelry should be beautiful. Now that seems a pretty normal thing to think about, but actually it's a very subjective thing too. Something that I like, maybe you don't like, something you like, I don't like. So what I normally do when we talk about the real elements of jewelry, beauty, which is in the eye of the beholder, if you're designing something, you have to make sure that you love it. If you love it and you would wear it, then most people would love it and also wear it. So that's my take on the beauty aspect. Then of course there are two more aspects. One is the durability. And we often think that jewelry is something that we are going to enjoy for many years. It's not something we buy today, wear a few times and throw away. In fact, for most cases, we are handing it down because of its value, its intrinsic value. We hand it to our sons and daughters, and then they onto their sons and daughters. So it has a lot of also sentimental value attached to it. So durability is important, no matter which way you look at it. And finally, there's the comfort element. It needs to be comfortable for somebody to wear it. Any piece of jewelry that is designed and is not that comfortable will probably spend more time in the jewelry box than around the wearer's neck or being enjoyed by the wearer. So the comfort is an important aspect. So if we look at aesthetic values and technical skills, which are hugely important. Yes, one has to understand aesthetics, and one needs to know a little bit about how to put things together, how to combine colors, etc. That can all be learned quite easily. But it's not just putting your ideas on paper and seeing how to mix and match things. A good jewelry designer is one that understands the technical skills involved in making the piece of jewelry, because anybody can produce a beautiful picture. And when I say anybody, any artist can produce a beautiful picture. If you look at this example for a very popular painting done by Escher. Escher was around in the 1920s, 1930s. He was a prominent Dutch artist, and he really created some amazing designs. And you can see that his designs often defy gravity. There are stairs in every direction. People can walk up and down and upside down on those stairs, which of course we know is not a possibility, but of course on a piece of paper it is. So when it comes to drawing jewelry, if we draw things that are not possible, which is, it's possible that people can do that, but if they're not feasible to make, then we're just wasting our time. So it's very, very key that we understand, of course, the technical skills involved in the making of the jewelry itself. Another thing that's really wonderful about jewelry designing, and that it has few limitations in our inspiration, where we get our inspiration from. Of course, nature would be one of the biggest places we are inspired by, but we can take inspiration from architecture, from different cultures, from art, from history. There are no bounds there, and therefore it really frees us up to create with jewelry. And there are many different themes that could be also for special occasions. And it's something we love in this industry. We always say it's a happy industry because we celebrate happy occasions with people. People come to us when they want to design something beautiful for a graduation, for an anniversary, a birthday gift, or maybe even weddings. So this is something that I've enjoyed throughout many, many years, that we enjoy celebrating happy times with people. So let's take a look now at a demonstration in what we need for designing jewelry. And if you look, it's really not necessary to have lots of tools and equipment. In fact, we can easily design jewelry with a few templates, a few good pencils. Sometimes we have some gems to inspire us. Many times we can even look at pieces of jewelry. But I always tell people that it's not necessary to have a piece of jewelry to be able to design jewelry. We never want to copy somebody else's work. We also have many different charts, and the charts give us the ability to assess the depth of a stone or the weight of a stone, which is sometimes interesting if we don't have one. Now, when we start designing, one of the easiest ways to come up with many designs is tracing. And some people think that tracing equates to copying. And I have to tell you that it really doesn't. There are ways that we trace in order to be creative and in order to come up with new designs. So you can see from this example that we traced a little element of one particular design, and we traced another element of a completely different design. We combined them together and quickly highlighted them with a black ink pen, and then retraced the two of them together again. And when I take my piece of tracing paper and I flip and trace the design over, I can actually place it in so many different directions to then retrace again to come up with another new design. So this is the way that initially designers might start. They might start by creating over 100 of these types of designs a day, and from 100 designs we can get maybe 2 or 3 really good ones. Now sometimes we will add gemstones into the mix, and as we add a gem, it's very important to know the length to width ratios of the gemstones, because when we create the jewelry today, we also buy a lot of parts that are ready-made, like the heads that hold the stones in place, or bezels and things like that. So if we draw the gemstone, we can then decide whether we're going to place the gemstone in whichever direction we like. It could be facing up, facing down, as you see with this pear shape, and we can put it in many different locations on the design. And once we've put our gem, then we have to also remember the settings, which are very important. And we can also create yet the same design again, but with a totally different stone and a totally different setting. And therefore we would have yet again a new design. So if we look at rendering, which is coloring our materials and our designs today, this is done typically with colored pencils instead of paint. Of course, when I started many years ago, painting was the way to do it. But then we didn't have the wax-based colored pencils that we now have. So with a pencil that has that smoothness, the waxy finish to it, we can actually use a technique that allows us to get perfect heights and dimension with, of course, the white, which would be our first color to use. And then we can add a body color to it, we can add shading to it, and we can really get a 3D effect in a fraction of the time that it would take us to do it in the colored pencils. Here you see how blending the white color with the body color is very, very fast and actually very, very easy. No mess, no water to spill. It's just really fast and easy on the paper. And then once we add a little bit of shading, that adds extra dimension to the piece, especially if you have cast shadows that might be incorporated. And finally, we can add the gemstones with their highlights, and we have a beautiful design created in a very short time. Plus, we have the benefit with the wax-based crayons or pencils to give us that waxy finish or a shine to look like the metal has been polished and the gemstones have also been polished as well. We want to make sure to finish everything off with proper settings and highlighting the settings, and then small stones, maybe some accent stones like melee, diamond melee, or even possibly colored stone melee. And we will end up with something very fast and very good looking in a short amount of time. So here you'll see a difference between an uncolored piece and then the colored piece. So when we look at these kinds of designs, these are designs that are actually not made for a customer, but rather made for the manufacturer. Manufacturer does not need pretty color pictures. He just needs proper lengths, widths, and heights. And colored pictures are really for competitions and for the customer who likes to see what the finished piece will eventually look like. The manufacturer is going to look at things that are on guidelines, things that have measurements, and that are very, very accurate. So we need a lot of training and practicing in doing drafting for jewelry for the manufacturer. And those drafting techniques are very step-by-step techniques which can be learnt in a very short time as well. A lot of people often ask me, is it possible to draw jewelry with no art background? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. We have plenty of people coming in from many different walks of life. We have bankers, we have people who have never ever done any kind of art, and at the end of the course they are managing to create wonderful jewelry. So next on our list is to take a look at how to draw maybe something for the customer, as in a ring. If I was sitting with my customer, I would do a quick sketch on a piece of paper and I would offer them some choices. I would show them maybe a type of gemstone, and I would give them different elements that might go with that gemstone and different ways to see how the gemstone would look. And if my customer said, yes, that's a very nice design, let's take this to the next step, of course that next step would be to draw it very accurately in top side and end view with accurate measurements for our manufacturer. So this is something that in general we start with drafting techniques, and we start with a top view, which is usually the easiest view. We use templates and we bring down the information to what is called the side view, where we then see the finger hole through the ring, and we transfer all of our widths down and we create the heights to see what that would look like from that particular view. And finally, the last view to concentrate on would be the end view of the ring. Now, the end view is important because sometimes there are maybe a few elements that can't be clearly seen in the top and the side view. And when those are missing in top and side, we have to bring them up in the end view. So you see how each one of these designs is related. It's like a relationship between them, and those relationships are very clearly seen once it is on the paper in black and white in a very clear drawing. So the manufacturer would be able to create a design like this quite well. If our design is a symmetrical design, then we probably only need one side view and one end view, and we would have enough information to give to our manufacturer. But if you have an asymmetrical design, then you may have to go one step further and do two side views, or even possibly two end views, as you see with this drawing here.
I hope you're enjoying the session that Tanja has put together for you, and I just wanted to share a little bit more about what your options are if you were interested in learning more about gemstones and jewelry using a professional training course that we offer here at JDMIS. The course fees are supported by the Singapore government Skills Future initiatives, so you can actually get a Skills Future grant for 50 to 70% of the tuition fees, as well as use your Skills Future credits if you have them to pay for the tuition fees. Now, if you're interested in participating in one of these courses, we have a special promotion for our webinar participants. There is a QR code on the screen that you can scan, and that is something you'd be able to use to actually further reduce the cost of your tools and materials. So while we have so the Singapore government generously supporting tuition fees, we can also help out a little bit by reducing the costs of the tools and the equipment that we give out during the course. With this voucher, you can claim it and make use of that to get from $60 to $150 off your course fees. So with that, I'd like to return you to Tanja. And if you'd like to know more about the courses that we offer, please stay on at the end of the program.
Great. Now when we finish our drawing, it is time to pass the drawing on to the next stage, which is of course to the person who is going to start making that piece of jewelry. So if we look at going down a traditional design path and see how it might be taken to the metals, we have here a very interesting video on how jewelry would be made in metal. And we're starting this from the very, very beginning, which means that we might take some scraps, or we might take some metal gold and even add some alloys to that metal to create a 14 karat or an 18 karat gold. We would heat it all up, melt it down, and then we would produce our own ingots. Now that's possible, and that's very commonly done here in Asia. But in other countries, we just buy our sheet metal ready-made or our wire. If you have the ingot, then you will have to roll it out and make it into the thickness that you need to create your jewelry. So with the right thickness, we can then cut out our design, apply it to the metal, and then saw it out. After having the shape, we can then hammer and form and shape it. And this is two pieces that were hammered and formed, and then connecting those pieces is done with a technique we call soldering. So with soldering, we have to bring up the metal to quite a high heat, and we add little pallions of solder, which melt and help the metal fuse together. After which, if it's a ring, we can put it onto a ring mandrel. We can hammer it, especially hammer the two parts that come together to wrap around the finger, and then resolder the two bottom ends together. We can add a top to the design, a nice flat top shape, again by soldering the metals together. And once that is done and it's secure, we can then file off all of the excess. And then comes the filing. We have lots of filing and cleanup to do, quite time consuming, but it's wonderful to see your jewelry design come to life. So when it comes to the filing, we have many ways to do this. We also have different pieces of equipment like flex shafts that we can speed up the job. So once we have that piece of jewelry like the ring, we can then embellish it. And one of the ways to embellish it is, of course, to add gemstones. So first we can draw onto the metal itself, and we can create the shape and determine where the gemstones are going to go. We can then drill holes to help us to prepare for the gems and to create seats for the gems. We do this with different types of tools. We have drill bits, we have burrs, which can create just a nice seat for the stone to sit in. And then we have hand tools such as gravers, where we start to remove metal. And that metal removal cleans up around the stone, and it starts to raise up little tiny beads that will hold the gemstones in place. A little bit like prongs, but prongs tend to be much bigger. These are very tiny little prongs, which we call beads. And when these are raised in the right location, we put the stones in, and then with another type of tool, we're going to push those little beads down over the girdle of the stone, holding every single stone in place. So this is a labor of love. It takes a very long time. It takes a long time to learn how to do this kind of skill, but it is quite exciting. It's fun to do it if you know how, and it is something that gives a really nice finishing effect. And of course, once all the setting is done, there's a little bit of cleanup after that on polishing machines, buffing and cleaning, so that we have this wonderful result in the finished product itself. So now we're going to pass on to Alex, who's going to talk a little bit about computer-aided design. This is a new technology that started out and became popular since the 1990s. And nowadays, it has really picked up the pace, and we find so many people interested in this particular area.
So Tanja has just given us a very interesting view on the traditional design process, from conceptualization to technical drawing, to then how that technical drawing is interpreted by the craftsman in the workshop to turn into a beautiful piece of jewelry. But that's not the only way we do things. In fact, technology is changing a lot about the design process and also the manufacturing process. So we wanted to share with you a little bit about how computer-aided design and then later computer-aided manufacturing is revolutionizing the jewelry industry. Let's start with the design process. And probably the easiest way to do this is with a quick demonstration of the specialized jewelry software that we use in the jewelry industry. Now, there aren't very many tools that we use in the jewelry industry, but they are all quite unique in the sense that they know about the things that jewelers need. They know about the sizes of the gemstones, they know about the measurements that need to be used, they know about all of those sorts of things. And the software that we use and that we train in the school is probably the most popular one in use around the world, and also the one with the most features and functions. It's called GemVision Matrix, and it's a software that's based on a 3D program called Rhinoceros. Now, you can see when we work on the system, there are actually multiple screens visible. I've got 4 quadrants there, and you can see that the changes I make are actually updated in all 4 quadrants simultaneously. That's very useful because when we design jewelry, we are not designing it for just presentation. We are actually creating a millimeter accurate 3D model. You can see that the system was able to very quickly allow me to place gemstones. It had tools that helped me work out the spacing and the sizing, and it also knows how I will typically be adjusting and cutting my metals in order to make space for those gemstones. So all of those orange things that you see on screen are actually cutters that are specific shapes in order to allow me to create exactly the shape that I need to hold those gemstones. And you can see within just a few moments, we've been able to produce quite a detailed set of geometry that's going to be able to hold the gemstones in place and give me a very solid and properly manufacturable design. I can also apply materials. So for example, here you can see I'm applying different metal materials. I can look at it from all kinds of wonderful angles, and I can even determine weights, gemstone quantities. I can really get a good sense of all of the different elements that I need before I go to manufacturing. Now, this is an example of a ring that I might send to be manufactured, but we can do much more than that. And I wanted to show you a couple of examples of tools that kind of really fast track the way that we can design jewelry. Here, for example, we're working with a gemstone, and I automatically have a bezel function, I automatically have an under bezel function, and I can even create prongs. But if you look at the prongs, they're not terribly exciting, so if I wanted to, as a designer, be able to really customize my designs, I have every option available at my disposal. So you can see that I can angle the prongs inwards, I can change the shape of the prongs, I can really kind of adjust every element of every piece of the geometry. Rather than just mixing and matching existing components, I can customize those components until I have something truly unique that makes my design different from everybody else's on the market. Once I have my gemstone and my setting in place, I need to think, how am I going to present this gemstone to everyone looking at it and to the wearer? And if I place it on a ring, for example, I have tools that let me very quickly create the shapes that I need for different styles of ring. So here you can see we've created a cathedral ring in order to be able to support not just the big central gemstone, but also a beautiful halo that we want to produce to attract attention to that central gemstone. And if we talk about the halo, this is one of the ways in which the jewelry-specific computer system can help us really speed up, because certain types of things are very generally used in jewelry, and we can take steps to really speed up that process. Here you can see we can use a halo builder to create a beautiful rim of gemstones around the end, and then we can adjust the cathedral ring shape to make sure that it comes up exactly to support the halo. And as you can see, there's a lot of adjustment that goes on. Computer-aided design is not automatic. It's not an AI system that just generates for you a beautiful piece of jewelry. It is, in fact, something that the designer is intimately in control over. So these aren't expert systems, these aren't AI generated, we're not mixing and matching existing components. We're simply using tools to speed up the design process, but at the end of the day, it's the designer's experience and it's the designer's knowledge about jewelry design, aesthetics, and manufacturing that makes a successful design or not. But let me show you some ways in which the system can really speed things up. For example, here we're creating a pendant shape. And once we have our basic shape, we can actually get the system to work out exactly how many gemstones are going to fit onto that surface. This is traditionally something that's very time consuming and very complicated for the designer. They need to do all kinds of measurements. They need to do trial and error. With the computer, I can do this very quickly. I can do the prong settings to hold all the gemstones in place, and I can cut the seats in order to be able to have exactly the geometry that I need to be able to 3D print the piece and then to have a piece that is ready for us to manufacture. As you can see here, I've created in not a very big amount of time a very complex design with, I think, nearly 80 gemstones. And as you can see also, a bail, that's a kind of a very typical jewelry thing. I can add a bail onto the end of my piece and I can create something that is unusual. So I can customize that bail until it's my own personal design instead of just mixing and matching existing parts. I can then do a lot of interesting things. Once I have my jewelry ready, I can apply different gemstone materials. I can render it to create a photorealistic drawing of the piece, and I can even create beautiful high-resolution videos where I can do rotations of the piece and I can really show off the design without even having to manufacture it. So we've just seen an example of the specialized jewelry software, GemVision Matrix. And you've seen it at quite high speed. So we're working at about 4 to 6 times usual speed to be able to give you an impression without taking too much time in this presentation. But what are the other things that computer-aided design brings to the jewelry designer? Well, first of all, there's the quicker time to market. Once I've actually taken the time to design the piece on the computer, I then can use computer-aided manufacturing techniques to bring that to life, literally within a matter of days, rather than having to rely on the traditional design process that might take, and manufacturing process that might take quite a bit longer. I also can make quite sophisticated designs, but more importantly, elements that I like from one design, I can transfer to another very quickly, because I can cut and paste elements that I would like to keep, and they remain fully editable, so I can kind of incorporate them into pendants, earrings, rings, all with the same design theme. Most importantly though, what computer-aided design brings to the table is quality and precision. I'm able to measure the gemstone sizes before I send the piece to manufacturing. I'm able to get an estimate of the metal weight before I send the piece to manufacturing. And that helps me do better budgeting, have my customers know what they're going to be getting themselves in for before they get the bill at the end of the day. And when it comes to actually setting the gemstones, it also speeds the setting process because I can already create the shapes to hold the gems in place so that the jeweler doesn't need to cut the holes in the seats and create the prongs to hold everything in place. So computer-aided design is quite an interesting process to speed things up. The other way in which it speeds things up quite a lot is in the production of photorealistic images. Here you can see some beautiful examples of different types of designs that were rendered, and they actually look quite realistic. So this is quite an exciting opportunity for digital designers. They can create online catalogs without actually having to produce the pieces and then photograph those pieces. So what happens when we take our computer-aided design and put it through the jewelry manufacturing process? What changes? Well, one of the things that we do is we use specialized equipment to produce wax designs. It's very rare that we will actually produce the pieces in metal directly, because typically direct to metal machining has large amounts of waste. So instead what we do is we produce waxes. The waxes can be made via milling machines. Milling machines are a very old technology that's been used in many computer-aided manufacturing technologies. But the ones that we use in jewelry are quite interesting because of the precision that we need. So for example, in the mills that we use in jewelry, the micro-stepping motors have very, very, very tiny increments that they move the drill bits, and the drill bits themselves are pretty unusual, sometimes with elements as fine as 6 degrees, which means that at the very tip of the drill bit, they're finer than a human hair in order to be able to achieve the precision that's needed on such small surfaces. But that's not the only way we make our waxes. Another way we can produce our waxes is using what's called additive manufacturing, commonly known as 3D printing. And this produces your wax pieces layer by layer by layer and allows us to create some very unusual materials. It gives us more flexibility because we can really produce things with steep undercuts and with very interesting design patterns that would be almost impossible to mill. So let's talk a little bit about what happens once we send the file to a 3D printer. Here we have an example of a 3D printer that's using stereolithography. It's using light to harden a wax-like resin material, and you can then take that resin material and turn it into a piece of metal. Once the resin material is produced, you can see we produce many pieces on one individual tray here. Then we can take those and turn them into our finished jewelry pieces. How do we do that? Well, what we need to do is we need to go from wax to metal. And the process of going from wax to metal is the process of lost wax casting. Typically, this is done in a factory environment. And when we do training in lost wax casting, we use some of the most up-to-date jewelry equipment that you would find in bigger factories. But there are many different ways that you can do this. Let's look at one of the ways that we can do this using some specialized jewelry equipment. This is some small-scale jewelry equipment that you might find in a smaller factory. Here at the school we have slightly larger versions, and there are obviously much larger versions for the big companies that are using this in big volumes of millions of pieces a week. So the first thing that a jeweler will typically do is they will attach all of their wax or resin pieces onto what's called a wax tree. The wax tree is then weighed because the jeweler needs to understand how much gold, how much silver, the metal that they're going to use. They need to translate the wax weight into the metal weight so that they can buy and prepare the right amount of metal alloy that they're going to be using. Next, they will take an investment material. This is a powder that is used to create a mold of the material. The powder is usually made from gypsum if you're working with gold or if you're working with silver, or it can be phosphate-based if you're working with higher temperature materials like platinum or titanium. So we take this powdered mold material and we need to mix it with water in order to be able to have something that we can pour and that will flow around the wax pieces. Here we're mixing it with some water. We have to use very specific amounts in order to get the right texture. And we need to mix it up very effectively. When we mix these, we usually don't just whisk them up. We use tools, and we also use a vacuum. The reason we use a vacuum is because air bubbles are not our friend here. Every time you have an air bubble and that air bubble attaches itself close to the surface of the wax, you might get an unwanted bump or imperfection on the surface of your design. So it's very important that not only do we get a very smooth mixture, but we also get a mixture that has absolutely no air bubbles. So we mix it up in a vacuum, and we even pour it in a vacuum to make sure that there is zero chance of air bubbles in our final piece. Here we've mixed it for about 2.5 minutes, and we're about to pour it into the flask. And you can see as it pours into the flask, it's the right consistency that it's going to flow over and around all of the wax portions. And it's going to be able to pick up all of the fine detail that has been produced on the wax by the 3D printer or by the mill. Now this process in and of itself might take 20, 30, 40 minutes to set up and to get ready. But then we need to let the mold material dry. Now that process can take as little as 2 hours if we're working with silver or gold, as much as 24 hours if we're working with platinum or titanium. And you can see the wax is now trapped inside the mold material. So we now need to remove the wax from the mold to leave the hollow space that is going to then be filled with the metal. We do that using a burnout furnace. And burnout furnaces are basically fancy ovens that can go to a variety of temperatures. Now, depending if we're working with wax or if we're working with resins, we have different temperature cycles or burnout cycles that we will need to use. And we will also have a variety of different temperature levels and durations that we need to keep track of. And a typical burnout process for wax might take 8 to 12 hours, and for resins might take 12 to 15 hours. So it's not a fast process, and it's usually an overnight thing. Once the wax is burned out, then we need to start setting up our casting system. The casting system is what's going to melt the metal. We put in an alloy that we know and that we trust to be of the correct proportion. And then we set our melting temperature. Now, the melting temperature is a very important thing to consider, because we want the metal to be molten so that we can pour liquid metal into the mold. But at the same time, if the melting temperature is too high, when we pour it into the mold, the temperature difference between the mold and the molten metal will be so high that it might cause cracking inside the mold. So we want to try and get a balance, and we want to get the temperature of the metal high enough that it is going to flow very nicely and smoothly, and when we pour it into the mold, it's not going to freeze and then maybe not fill in all of the different areas of the mold. But we also want to make sure that the temperature is not so high that we're unable to get a clean cast, because we damage the mold as we pour the metal in. The equipment we're using here is heating the metal using induction to be able to heat the metal using electrical currents in the molten metal, and that allows us to heat it very effectively and very quickly. Now we've just placed the mold inside the casting machine, and as you can see, the system is actually a sealed system, so it's very safe to use. And as the temperature goes up, we are also sucking out the air, because normally the oxygen in the air can cause oxidation on the surface and can actually cause the casting not to be quite as clean as we would like. So once we've removed all of the air and we've got the temperature up to the melting temperature, we're now at 960 degrees, the melting temperature for silver, which is what we're melting here. You can see the silver is molten. The molten silver is then ready to be poured, but we need to raise the temperature just a little bit higher so that we can actually pour the molten silver and not worry about it cooling and freezing before it actually gets into our mold. So once we've got up to about 980 degrees, which we're almost at now, then we are going to simply tilt the whole machine and pour the metal into the mold. You can see it pouring into the mold there. At the same time, the machine is vibrating and we've got high pressure. You can see we've got 2 atmospheres of pressure pushing the molten metal into the mold to make sure we get a really, really accurate and really good imprint of the mold in the metal. Now we let the metal cool, and then we need to devest the mold. What does that mean? We need to remove the actual mold material so as to be able to get access to the metal piece. How do we do that? Well, it's actually relatively simple. This is super hot, so we need to simply throw it in a bucket of cold water. The fact that it is heating the water and the water is evaporating causes a lot of movement, and that actually causes a lot of the investment powder to dissolve and to leave us with just the finished piece of metal. You can see the finished piece of metal here is almost ready, but it still has a little bit of investment powder stuck on it. It's a bit of the mold material stuck on it. And so typically there's one last step where we would do some sandblasting to remove any of the mold powder and the leftover elements to just reveal the finished piece of jewelry as we expected it to be, with all of the fine detail that we were looking forward to. So what happens once I've got this? Well, as you can see, the material itself is on a base, the base where the metal was flowing to reach those areas. And the first step by the metalsmith for something that has been investment cast, either using 3D printing or traditional wax technologies, would be to cut off the sprues or the metal flow channels. And you can see that here we've got a couple of different examples where we've basically cut those sprues off and we're just left with the final piece of jewelry. Now, the elements that you see that are left over, those are made of precious metal. So we don't throw those away, those are recycled. The next thing for the jeweler to do would be to touch up the casting to make sure that it is ready for the gemstones. That involves looking at and making sure all of the seats are appropriate and are the right size for the gemstones to fit in, and making sure all of the prongs and other pieces of metal that are going to hold the gemstones steady are all well suited to the setting. This process, if we're working with computer-aided design, can take a fraction of the time that it would take using traditional techniques, because I'm not having to cut all of those elements, I'm simply having to ensure that the sizes are right and making sure that the gemstones fit. So typically this can take as little as maybe 20% of the time of traditional jewelry manufacturing, especially when I have lots of gemstones. If I have hundreds of gemstones and I'm saving a little bit of time on every single gemstone, that can add up to a really valuable time saving and a significant cost reduction. Now, there was one thing I just wanted to highlight, because when we look at all of these wonderful new technologies, sometimes we think, well, why use the old technology? And the answer is that there's kind of a really good reason for using some types of technologies for some types of applications. The new technology is great if you're working towards production. So a lot of companies, even that do bespoke designs, will actually work with computer-aided design and computer-aided manufacturing when it comes to their manufacturing process. But computer-aided design is not yet something that's very popular with a customer. A customer usually likes to sit in front of a designer and talk over their ideas and maybe have a cup of coffee and maybe see some different design sketches, etc. That's a very personal design process. And it's one that you can't really replace by sort of turning everything inside out and having the customer look over the designer while they're simply clicking on a computer. So typically, the traditional design process still takes place with customers in the front end, but the computer-aided design process is taking over how we go from the design concept all the way into the manufacturing process. Which is great, because all of these things are improving the speed and the efficiency with which we can produce jewelry if we have factory conditions and all of this expensive equipment and expensive software and many different people involved in the entire chain. But there are technologies that are making the manufacturing process easier for the jewelry artists as well. Those that aren't necessarily going to be working within a big ecosystem, and they're kind of taking control over the design process and the manufacturing process all themselves. So instead of making things by hand, they can work with powdered metals. This is an interesting new development that has come about since probably the 1980s with precious metals. And it came about as a result of new developments in precious metal recycling. Typically, precious metals have always been so valuable that the cost of recycling them is much less than the cost of mining them. And as a result, recycling is a big business. In the recycling process, for example, for silver, one of the things that they will recycle is they'll recycle the silver connectors in electronics, they'll recycle silver from X-rays, they'll recycle silver from dental appliances and things like that. Anywhere where silver is used in a medical or a technological situation, there is an infrastructure to be able to recycle that silver. And typically, what was done in the past was that the silver would simply be extracted, in this case by electrolysis, where the silver would build up on one of the electrodes and then simply be scraped off, melted down, and sold back to the industries that needed it. But as a result of improvements in technology, what some of the refineries started to do was to take that silver and grind it into a superfine powder. The superfine powder is, when I say superfine, it's about 1 little grain of metal is about 200 times smaller than a grain of salt. So they're typically between 1 to 3 microns in size. And the implication of having such a very, very fine powder is that some interesting properties of metals that happen only when you have very, very fine particles of those metals become possible for us to leverage. And so what we do is we take that powdered metal, we take about 94% of the powdered metal, we take about 6% of water and an organic binder that's just going to hold it all together nicely. And we mix it into something that is then manipulable. You can take it and you can manipulate it with your hands or with very simple tools. So you don't need factory equipment to do your designing. You can actually use some very, very basic tools. Once you're happy with your rough shape, then you can refine your shape after drying the piece. When you dry the piece, what's happening is, we said there was 96% metal, 6% organic binder and water. Well, when you dry it, the water all evaporates and you're just left with the metal powder being held together by the organic binder. This makes a very brittle material that is very, very easy to refine and to get some really good elements on. You can file it about 20 times faster than you would file a traditional piece of jewelry, and you can get detail that you would otherwise not be able to get if you're engraving, for example. So once you've got the piece in a ready state, your next step would be to turn it into the solid metal from the metal powder. And how do we do that? Well, that process is called firing. We want to raise the temperature of the piece of jewelry up to just below the melting point. If I go above the melting point, the piece will melt and it will lose its shape. But if I stay below the melting point, one of the properties of powdered metals is that the individual particles will sinter together and fuse to become a solid piece of metal. Now, at the same time, one of the interesting things about this is that the organic binder that we were using to hold it all together burns away, and so I'm left with only the pure metal that is now sintered into a solid piece that I can then finish as I normally would. The finished product can be 999 silver, that's pure silver in the case of the 999 product. I can use 22 karat gold, I can use 925 silver, I can use 950 silver with other rare earth minerals like germanium that will reduce the amount of tarnish in the silver, so I can kind of change the properties of the silver by changing the alloy. And I can also work with lower cost materials like copper and bronze and brass, etc. So there's a lot of flexibility when I work with these materials. And the very cool thing about this is that once it's fired, once it's sintered and it's become solid, it is almost indistinguishable from traditionally manufactured pieces. So I could brush it, I could set stones in it, I could burnish it, I could take it to my jeweler and ask them to solder pieces to it. If I have traditional metalsmithing techniques at my disposal, I can use all of those techniques on the same products. So it's quite an interesting way to produce, and it's a very interesting way for independent designers that might not have access to the amount of factory equipment that traditional jewelry companies might, to be able to produce quality jewelry in the metals very, very quickly. They can be combined in really interesting ways. So rather than having to solder the metal pieces together using soldering techniques, which requires me to heat them and to then have potentially fire scale that I need to deal with, I can actually place the metals together, and as I sinter the powdered metals of different types of materials, they will actually fuse together and give me a solid piece of metal that would be very difficult for me to do otherwise. For example, here we have some beautiful pieces that are gold inlay on a silver background. That type of filigree work would be extremely difficult to achieve using traditional techniques and would require a lot of cleaning up and a lot of steps in order to make sure I get something of the same level of quality and beauty. And some jewelers are even using metal clays to convert their back-end processes. So typically, if I were mass producing pieces, I might be mass producing 1,000 pieces or even 10,000 pieces. When I'm producing those 10,000 pieces, normally I would make one master. The one master I would make in a low-cost metal that then I can take a rubber mold of and I can turn into my mold that is going to create thousands of waxes so that I can cast those thousands of waxes into metal pieces. Now, instead of having to go through the entire process of making a wax, making a mold and casting the wax, taking the master metal piece and then making a rubber mold and then creating all of my waxes from there, I can skip the first set of casting steps by simply working with a metal clay, creating my master in the metal clay material, and then creating my rubber mold directly from that metal clay material. So it's speeding up processes for independent designers, and it's also finding ways to improve the ways that bigger companies can work if they're looking to speed up their internal processes. There's less time required to produce the metal designs. There's a lower investment of tools and equipment for individuals that want to get into this field, and the learning curve is much, much faster than that using traditional techniques, because you don't have as many tools to learn, and a lot of the tools are tools that you're already kind of familiar with. So you know how to use your fingers and your hands in more traditional ways, and it's much easier for you to get started with this type of technique. So this is a great recommendation that we have for people that are getting started to work with metals. And Tanja is now going to give us a demonstration of how we work with the metal clays so that you can see it from start to finish, how quickly we can produce a piece of jewelry, and a beautiful piece of jewelry at that.
One of the wonderful things about this new technology is how easy it is to work with. As you can see that it's just very soft, you can roll it, you can squish it between your fingers, you can roll it out and make a little snake with it. You can really form and shape it into any shape you want. So it's very pliable, very malleable, and we have something there that we just don't have when we're working with metals, with the traditional metals, that is. So we can wrap it on a mandrel. This is an example of making a ring here. It's quite easy to wrap. We normally wrap it on a piece of Post-it sticker so that it doesn't stick to the mandrel itself. And once we dry it, it becomes hard. And then with the slightly harder surface, we can then take a file and we can do filing to smooth off all the edges to make sure that, you know, the shape is perfect, etc. Once it's hard, you can remove it from the mandrel. You can also remove the Post-it sticker. That allows us access to the inside of the ring, and then we can clean up the inside as well. It's so important to clean everything up when it's in this, what we call a green state, because it is 20 times more work to clean it up in the metal later. So here you see the firing, and when we fire it, it heats up, it catches a fire, a small flame, not very big, and we have to heat it up and keep it heated to about anything above 650 degrees centigrade. This means that you could actually fire it on your own gas stove at home, which is nice because it means you don't really need to buy any additional tools and equipment. In the video, you'll see we use a torch, which is also possible. Of course, if you have a kiln, you could use a kiln as well. And then after it's fired, we have to brush it, and we brush it very carefully with a steel brush, which is going to remove a lot of crystallization that forms on the surface when it is fired. And so that already brings out the shine in the piece, but it's kind of a matte shine. So to finish it off, we take a stainless steel burnisher and we rub it very firmly with the burnisher. And by doing that, it compresses all the little tiny particles of the material, and we get a very perfectly shiny finish. So a little bit of buffing after that with a small cloth. This is a proper jewelry cloth, and we'll get a lovely, shiny, complete, finished ring. So this can be done with all kinds of pieces of jewelry. It can be for pendants, earrings, you name it, even bangle bracelets. It's all possible with this new technology, which is fast and fun. You can see how many interesting designs can be produced. So if you're a sculptor, if you're a person that likes to work with clay, then this is perfect, because you would be able to convert all of your interesting designs into metal. Now we'll take a look at fashion jewelry. And there is some confusion. I think many people believe fashion jewelry to be what is commonly termed as costume jewelry. To us, fashion jewelry is distinctly different. Costume jewelry is something that is mass-produced. It is generally produced in such high quantities that they are very, very cheap. And the materials that are used tend to also be very inexpensive, like base metals and glass, and very oftenly the gemstones are actually glued in place instead of being properly set. So the actual manufacturing techniques are either done by machine and the settings typically glued. This is different from fashion jewelry, where every little piece is made by hand. They're individual pieces made one by one. You could call them limited edition pieces, where all the stones are set properly the way that we would imagine them to be set with fine jewelry, and where we can select what kinds of material that we want to use, not just base metals with plating, but of course we can also use gold and silver or any material that we choose depending on what the price bracket is. So with fashion jewelry, it's a lot of care and a lot of effort has gone into making those pieces individually. And there are so many different styles. There are also many, many different techniques that you can learn. And the wonderful thing is to be able to actually mix and match those techniques with other techniques in jewelry, such as the one we just talked about, the precious metal clays and the metal smithing and even CAD and CAD parts. We can actually produce pendants, and then we can use the fashion jewelry to combine them around the neck or make them wearable. So with all the different techniques, there's a lot of fun in discovering how the fashion jewelry actually works. So let me give you a quick demonstration on fashion jewelry. Typically we need a few bits and pieces of equipment like a beadboard and some small hand tools. And when we start to lay out designs, it's very interesting how people think you always start from one end and you string and just thread materials on from one end to the other. Actually, that's not at all the way we do it. We would start from the center, designing everything from the middle and back to the ends. We would be very careful what we put in the center here, because that's the part that people see. As it goes back and around the neck, people see less and less of the material. So the most important, the most expensive materials would always come in the front. And then when we attach them to the threads, be they metal threads, be they soft threads, whether it's with knotting or without knotting, then generally speaking, we are usually doing the front first, and we're very careful to work on symmetry, to make sure the symmetry on all our pieces is exact and is quite perfect. And finishing is also a very important aspect to the fashion jewelry. Where finishing in costume jewelry is very fast, and we said it was glued and it was just quickly done, the finishing on the fashion jewelry takes time, and it's more as it would be done on the fine jewelry. We make sure that the fashion jewelry is something that lasts and something that is not going to be just worn 2 or 3 times and fall apart on the wearer. So that being said, you can see some techniques here where we're using a steel wire, which is known as bead wire, and we use crimps to finish the ends. And we make sure to tuck all of our wires into the last ends of our materials, where it will never be seen, where it will never come out and scratch the neck. And we also make sure that the tension in those wires is perfect for the wearing, neither too tight nor too soft with any of the wire being exposed. We use tools like chain nose pliers to crush the crimps really well. The method of crushing the crimps is also very important, that you crush from both sides, not just one side only. And a few extra little delicate finishes, like using the wire guardians and things like that, that are important to a well-finished piece of jewelry. Also, when we talk about other types of accessories, like making earrings to match, we use wires that we understand are really good quality wires. Here in Asia, we can often buy wires that when you lift and lower the little loop in order to attach one part to another, that loop just snaps off and breaks. It is much better to buy quality wires that can be lifted and lowered as many as 50 times. And those are the kind of things that we look for in quality fashion jewelry designs. We don't use substandard wires, pins, eye pins, head pins. We learn how to make our own eye pins and head pins. And again, knowing the wires that are the right type of wires to use is part and parcel of quality fashion jewelry. So you can see here the difference between one that breaks very quickly and one that we can really manipulate many, many times over. So putting those component parts together is also a skill and an art. And we find that we can give lots of tips and tricks in this area to help people maximize the beauty in their creations. And it's something that is also very therapeutic. A lot of people really enjoy not just the creative aspect, but the technical aspect of putting it all together. People really have that feel that it's doing them well. I hope you have enjoyed the information presented here, and that you can see that every piece of your jewelry is made with a great deal of love and care, and as we say, it is a labor of love, in fact, to make some of these wonderful pieces of jewelry that last a lifetime. So for those of you who want to try it out, to have a go, then please come and join us and see what we do here, because we do have a lot of fun.
Tanja, thank you very much for that fascinating tour of the world of gemstones and jewelry. That left us with a tremendous amount of information and, I think, an excitement to go off and start looking at the jewelry pieces that we own, or when we're next out shopping for jewelry, better understanding the gemstones that are out there. Now, if you'd like to know a little bit more about gemstones and jewelry, let me tell you a little bit about the Jewelry Design and Management International School, because we are the only school in Singapore specialized in jewelry education, and we are your best option if you want to get to know more about gemstones, about designing jewelry, about manufacturing jewelry, or basically about anything related to the jewelry industry. So what is JDMIS? We are a private educational institution based in Singapore, and we've been operating since 2007. Now, as a school, we have an established curriculum with certification courses for specific skills competencies, with diploma courses for people that need a more comprehensive qualification, and with pathways to UK universities for people that want to pursue a degree in jewelry. But we've actually been training the jewelry industry and jewelry artisans here in Singapore since 1987, and we're an integral part of the jewelry industry in the region. We have a unique approach to training that makes us your best option if you're interested to get to know more about gemstones and jewelry. So let me share with you some of the interesting elements of our training programs. First of all, our instructors. Now, I'm sure you've gotten the feeling that Tanja is a very knowledgeable and capable instructor in the field of gemstones and jewelry, which absolutely she is. She has 30 years of experience training in design and gemstone knowledge. But in fact, all of our instructors are experienced professional trainers, and they have industry experience. So we don't bring in trainers that haven't actually used their skills. All of our trainers are actually part-time trainers that are using their skills commercially and then coming to share their experiences and their passion with our students and our graduates. That makes a huge difference to us. We also have really small class sizes because we're doing mostly hands-on programs, and if you're doing hands-on training, you don't want to have 20 people in a class. You don't even want to have 15 people in a class. You need personal attention. And so typically our courses will have 8 to 10 people in a class. Another thing that's really interesting is that everything is included. Now, what do I mean by everything? Well, we have a lot of people over the years that have come to us to say, you know what, I learned about jewelry, but I never got a chance to practice. And that's absolutely painful for us to hear. When you're learning a skill, you need to be able to put that skill to use in order to keep your skills current and in order to be able to get to the next level, to be able to really practice and master the skills that we've been teaching you. So our philosophy is that when you finish your class and you go home, you shouldn't then be wondering, well, how am I going to be able to use those skills? So we make sure you take with you absolutely everything that you need in order to practice those skills from home. Now, if you're doing a design course, that might be your pens, your pencils, your templates, all of those elements that you need in order to work. If you're doing a metal smithing course, for example, you receive your workbench, your flex shaft, all of your polishing bits, your torch, your hammers, your saws, basically everything that you need to start your home studio and to practice the skills that you're using. This is really, really important to us, that every course you do, you take home with you the things you need to continue working and improving your skills. So let's look at where you can embark on your jewelry journey. We have some people that enjoy the gemstones, so they start with gem and jewelry knowledge and then see where that takes them. We have designers. Designers typically have concepts and then use either classical jewelry design techniques or digital jewelry design techniques to get those concepts out and into a factory which can produce the pieces. We also have craftspeople, and the craftspeople will typically produce the pieces themselves using precious metal arts techniques. We have entrepreneurs that are producing and assembling jewelry using fashion jewelry arts techniques. And then once our designers or craftspeople have been able to master their techniques and they're ready to go to market, we also have courses that help them understand styles and trends, as well as business courses that help them prepare for getting their product to market by understanding their customers and knowing how to properly market and merchandise their products. Now, all of the programs are modular. You take one module and you receive a certificate to say you are competent in this particular skill. You combine a bunch of modules together to receive a diploma to say, you know what, I understand this aspect of the jewelry industry. And then we have basic and advanced diplomas that lead you through to international qualifications and degree programs in UK universities. So a lot of exciting options for people if you want to go very far with your academic education, if you want to go very deep into the skills qualifications that you're looking for, or if you want an all-rounded education in our industry. So we have 3 core programs. The 3 core programs are fine jewelry design. This is for people that are more interested in conceptualizing. They might do it on computer or on paper, but the idea is that a fine jewelry designer will normally work with a customer or they'll come up with their own concepts, but they probably won't be producing the pieces. They will work with a factory or a company to then produce the pieces that they're working on. This is something that's very much in demand in the Singapore context because there isn't very much manufacturing going on here in Singapore. Now, not everybody is a conceptual artist. Sometimes we have people that are more hands-on. They like to get their hands dirty. They like to create. They like to produce. And so we have a precious metal arts program that is geared towards the artisans. That means that instead of designing and then sending it off to a factory and hoping somebody will be able to get your vision right, you're the one that's executing your vision. You're producing from the raw materials. You're taking the sheets of metals and you're melting them and soldering them and sawing them and creating beautiful pieces from the raw materials. Finally, we have a number of entrepreneurial students that are interested to produce, but they're not necessarily wanting to produce from scratch because that takes time and a lot more effort and practice. So we have a fashion jewelry program that's geared to combining elements together. In other words, learning how to choose good quality components from different sources and then combining those components using professional techniques in order to be able to produce necklaces, bracelets, earrings, and other kinds of jewelry pieces that can then be very quickly turned around and sold. All of our programs are modular. That means you can start anywhere you like. So you could choose, for example, to go down the precious metals path, but you don't need to take the course in a specific order as long as you start with the level 1 courses before you move to the level 2, 3, and 4 courses. So for example, you could start with traditional metalsmithing, which is the way that you would see craftspeople work in factories. You could start with new metals and learn about the new technologies and how we use powdered metals to produce things very, very quickly. Or you could get started by learning more about gemstones and jewelry or styles and trends. So there's a lot of flexibility within our systems. We also have some interesting honors programs for people that are going through the diploma course that have very specific industry-related projects. And these are going to be very relevant for people that are interested to move into a higher education. So they're interested to go to diploma, advanced diploma, and eventually work towards a degree, because these projects give you the synthesis of all of the different components that you're learning that you would otherwise need to go into industry and have work experience in order to be able to achieve.
Excellent. So with that, I would like to thank you for joining us today. I'd like to thank Tanja, obviously, for her very informative seminar. And I'd like to suggest that if you'd like to know more about JDMIS and gemstones and jewelry fabrication and designing, etc., that you get in touch with us. So what I'll do is I'll finish the session just letting you know about what next steps might be. We have short certification programs that are a great start to any one of our courses, and they range in price from $1,800 to $2,800, depending on the tools and equipment that are included. If you'd like to know a little more about any one of our courses, or you simply want to have a chat with one of our admissions team and let them know what your interests are and how those match with the paths of our past successful jewelry design and fabrication artists, then you can give us a call or send us a WhatsApp on the telephone number listed on the screen. Another option would be for you to simply visit the booking pages and book an appointment where you can just have a quick chat with us to find out more.
So we'd like to share with you a little more about the Jewelry School. One quick way we can do that is by going through a brief tour. Now, when I say a brief tour, it's a little difficult for us to kind of walk you around the school while we're doing a webinar, but we do have a lot of video recordings of the school, including one that Tanja made during the grand opening of the school. Now, what we've done is it was a little long, so it was a half-hour tour where Tanja explained all about the different techniques that you're learning and the different kinds of things that you can work on. It's a great video, but maybe not suitable for this webinar. What we did was we shortened it. We shortened it to about 4 minutes, and it's kind of a lightning tour. It's a way for you to just see the different rooms, the different activities, the different places that we have at the school. Because with 5,000 square feet of space, we have the largest jewelry facility in Asia. We have more tools, more equipment, more possibilities than anywhere else. And we're excited to share those with you. So here we go. Let's have a look at this video.